Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard, where we set out to remember and celebrate the lives of those who lived to entertain us by visiting their final resting places. Today, we're back at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale to find such stars as Stephen tWitch Boss, Bob Cummings, Larry Flynt, and many more. Join us, won't you? Welcome back to Forest Lawn Glendale, the king of cemeteries in Los Angeles. The Cemetery of Legends. Founded in 1906, it established the Memorial Park style of cemetery here on the West Coast, and would launch several more Forest Lawn Memorial Parks throughout Southern California. The founder envisioned it as a place filled with nature, beautiful statuary, and noble architecture full of light and color. A place for reminiscing of the past, where artists study and sketch, where school teachers bring happy children to see things they read of in books, and where loved ones are memorialized by great artisans. Here is where many of the legends of early Hollywood chose to spend eternity, and are joined through the ages by legends from subsequent generations to the present day. We've covered a lot of ground here since our first visit back in 2017, spanning 6 tour videos, but there's always more to discover in these sprawling grounds and magnificent halls. If you haven't done so already, be sure to check out our first 6 videos of Forest Lawn Glendale. We begin our tour today not far in from the entrance on the right, in the Whispering Pines section next to the road. Here lies Cyril Hume. He was a writer, launching his career with the 1923 novel Wife of the Centaur. He would later sell the movie rights for the book, earning a record $25,000 for the rights. He would continue to write for films into the 30s, including adaptations of Tarzan the Ape Man and The Great Gatsby. He's perhaps best remembered today for writing the screenplay for the 1956 sci-fi classic Forbidden Planet. He was also nominated for an Emmy for the United States Steel Hour in 1956, and wrote episodes for shows like The Rifleman. Cyril was married to actress Helen Chandler of Dracula fame. He lived to be 66. Continuing in along Cathedral Drive, we stop around the corner on the right, in the easternmost part of this same section. Here lies Jane Darwell. The actress of stage and screen is perhaps best remembered today for her role as the matriarch of the Joad family in 1940's The Grapes of Wrath. The role won her the Oscar for Best Actress in a Supporting Role.
Sometimes they do something to you. They hurt you and you get mad and then you get mean.
She had roles in several more of Hollywood's most beloved classics, playing Mrs. Merriweather in Gone with the Wind, and starring alongside Shirley Temple in a number of her films, like Curly Top and Bright Eyes. In her 80s, semi-retired from acting, she was offered the role of the Bird Lady in Mary Poppins. She initially turned down the role, but Walt Disney then personally drove out to the retirement home where she lived to plead with her to take the role. She accepted, and it became one of the roles most beloved by Disney himself, the song Feed the Birds being his personal favorite. The role would be Jane's last. She died from a heart attack at age 87. Let's continue southeast in this same section. Here we find the grave of James Parrott. He was an actor and director, principally in the silent era, and the younger brother of Charlie Chase, who we visited here previously. He's perhaps best remembered today for his work with Laurel and Hardy, writing and directing a number of their films, including the Oscar-winning The Music Box in 1932, and their first feature, Pardon Us. He would also direct a number of films starring his brother, Charlie. He would often appear in small roles in the films he directed, and in the teens and 20s acted regularly, most notably in Hal Roach comedies in well over 100 productions. Heavy drinking affected his career in the 30s, and by 1939, he was dead at the age of 41. Cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but several cohorts maintained that he committed suicide. His brother Charlie became riddled with guilt after James's death, he himself sinking into the bottle and dying a year later. Turning your eyes southeast, you can't help but see the mausoleum that looms large at the top of the hill, the aptly named Great Mausoleum. It's my favorite mausoleum in the world, because not only does it host many of Hollywood's greatest legends, it's also a feast for the eyes and the soul with its art and architecture. It's LA's Louvre for the dead. Sadly, much of this art, the statuary and stained glass, meant to edify the living, are locked off in sections inaccessible to the public, only to be enjoyed by the dead. But you can experience a piece of it in the sections that are open to the public, the Memorial Terrace and Poets Corridor. This mausoleum is massive, spanning the hillside through some 11 terraces. And between all the crypts, sarcophagi, and niches in this mausoleum, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 80,000 entombments herein. We'll start here in the Memorial Terrace and the Columbarium of Memory, marked at the end by this awe-inspiring stained glass window. Here we find a cenotaph to Warren William. He was a popular actor in the 30s, both on Broadway and in Hollywood. He was known as the King of Pre-Code, the era of sound films between 1928 and 1934, before the Hays Code was implemented. After establishing himself on Broadway in the 20s, he signed with Warner Brothers in 1931 and quickly became a star of that era, often playing the villain or the wolf. Notable films include Gold Diggers of 1933, Employee's Entrance, and Cleopatra playing Julius Caesar. And in 1934, he became the first actor to portray lawyer Perry Mason in The Case of the Howling Dog. And for you lovers of classic monsters, Warren played Dr. Lloyd in 1941's The Wolfman. Warren William was just 53 when he died from multiple myeloma. His ashes were scattered in New York, and this cenotaph was later placed here to him with his wife. Moving downstairs to the Dahlia Terrace, we reach Poets Corridor, which features an array of stained glass windows, showing vignettes from poetry by the likes of Tennyson, Longfellow, and more. Nearby is my favorite columbarium herein, the Florentine Columbarium. I just love the distinctive ceiling and the large rustic urns in this columbarium. Here we find the niche of a man with an enviable name, A.F. Frankenstein. He was conductor of the Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra, and in 1913 he composed the music for the song that would become the official California state song, I Love You, California. It was adopted as the state song in 1951. It just tickles me pink to know that the man who wrote the California state song was named Frankenstein. Abraham Frankenstein lived to be 61. Making our way through the mausoleum, we reach the Sanctuary of Meditation. Here we find one of the more recent arrivals in this old and nearly full mausoleum, Larry Flynt. He was a notorious publisher, pornographer, and free speech advocate. In 1972, he created Hustler newsletter to promote his strip clubs. By 1974, it became the nationally distributed Hustler adult magazine. The magazine grew to massive popularity by the 80s. It stood in contrast to its contemporary, Playboy magazine, for being significantly more explicit. Larry Flynt publications would expand into videos and a television channel named Hustler TV. Due to the explicit nature of his publications, Larry Flynt had to constantly fight obscenity legal battles to prevent his work from being banned, citing free speech. During one of these trials in Georgia, Flynt and his lawyer were shot outside the courthouse. He was hit in the spine, leaving him paralyzed and wheelchair-bound for the rest of his life. The shooter, a white supremacist, had apparently been outraged by the depiction of an interracial couple in Hustler. Larry Flynt's legal battles on the grounds of free speech continued into the 80s, even going as high as the Supreme Court. This was dramatized in the 1996 film The People vs. Larry Flynt, in which Flynt was portrayed by Woody Harrelson in an Oscar-nominated performance. These First Amendment battles were clearly a defining aspect of his life for Larry, as they are featured on two of his crypts here in the mausoleum. In fact, it looks like this entire column belongs to Flynt, though I'm not sure which one he's actually in. He died from heart failure in 2021 at the age of 78. Further down this same corridor is one for our friends up in San Francisco, Joseph Strauss. He was a structural engineer known for revolutionizing bridge design and functionality. His bridges can be found all over the world, but his most notable build is featured right here on his marker. Do you recognize it? It's San Francisco's iconic Golden Gate Bridge. Joseph conceived of the idea of spanning the Golden Gate in the early 20th century, but many said it couldn't be done. As chief engineer of the Golden Gate Bridge, it was Strauss who figured out how to overcome all the obstacles, as well as fighting for legislation and funding to make the bridge happen. He saw his dream realized in 1937 when the bridge opened, a bridge which remains one of the most recognizable in the world. He died just 1 year later at the age of 68. His wife is entombed below him. Cleverly, her marker features the Golden Gate prior to the construction of the bridge, while Joseph's marker shows the same scene after the completion of the bridge. We've arrived now at the Gardenia Terrace. Here, in the columbarium of consecration, is the niche of Eric Blore. The English actor began a career on the West End stage, making a name for himself in revues and musical comedies before coming to Broadway and Hollywood. Here, he'd appear in more than 80 films between 1920 and 1954, often as butlers or English gentlemen. He can be seen alongside Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire in The Gay Divorcee and Top Hat. He also played Sullivan's valet in Sullivan's Travels. Other notable films include It's Love I'm After, and if you're a fan of classic Disney, Eric Blore was the voice of Mr. Toad.
Hello, you fellas! You're the very animals I was coming to see. Come along, hop up here. Travel, change, excitement! Ha, ha, ha!
Eric died from a heart attack at age 71. His wife Clara also dabbled in acting, appearing in small roles in around 14 films between 1938 and 1942, including The Invisible Man Returns. This is the Columbarium of Benevolence. High on the left wall is a musician named Gaylord Carter. He was an organist and composer, known for his work as an organist during the silent era, when a film's music was often played live on an organ right in the theater. He was discovered by silent comedy legend Harold Lloyd, who recommended him as theater organist at Sid Grauman's $1 Million Theater in 1926. Throughout the 20s, he continued to play in some of the biggest movie palaces in Los Angeles. At the onset of sound film, Carter shifted his musical efforts to radio, including playing for the Amos and Andy Show. In the 1960s, Carter helped revitalize an interest in silent film, providing recorded scores for re-released silent films, including films by Harold Lloyd. And if you're like me and have a deep love for the score for The Haunted Mansion, it was Gaylord Carter who played the organ on Grim Grinning Ghosts and elsewhere on the ride's soundtrack. He continued to perform into the 90s, keeping the art of movie house organ music alive for generations. Gaylord Carter lived to be 95. Over now to the Sanctuary of Harmony, where we find the crypt of Bobby Vernon. He was a comedic actor, principally of the silent era, appearing in more than 200 productions between 1913 and 1932. His work was typically in juvenile comedy roles in two-reelers, making his films popular with children of the era. By 1915, he was making films at Keystone Studios, often alongside Gloria Swanson as his leading lady. He made several talkies, but around this time began shifting his efforts to writing. In the 30s, he worked as a writer and comedy supervisor for the likes of W.C. Fields, Harry Langdon, and Bing Crosby. Bobby was just 42 when he died suddenly from a heart attack. We head now to what is undoubtedly the most grand and majestic of all the terraces, the Holly Terrace, which incorporates French Gothic architecture. You'll also find a replica of Donatello's St. George here. This is the Sanctuary of Valor. High on the right wall is the crypt of Antonio Moreno. The Spanish-born actor was considered one of silent film's great Latin lovers, even before Rudolph Valentino arrived on the scene. Antonio made his film debut in 1912, and during the silent era would appear alongside some of Hollywood's most glamorous leading ladies, like Greta Garbo, Paula Negri, Gloria Swanson, and Clara Bow. Notable films of this era include The Temptress, It, and The Spanish Dancer. At the advent of sound, his career faltered somewhat due to his strong accent. He then began appearing in and even directing Mexican films. His career resurged in the 50s with a role in John Ford's epic The Searchers and playing Dr. Carl Maya in Creature from the Black Lagoon, the role for which modern audiences likely know him best.
Luis, I'm going to Moraggio Bay to the Institute. You two are to wait here in the camp.
You be gone long?
Long enough to find out what this is.
Antonio passed away in 1967 at the age of 79. Further down is the Sanctuary of Sacred Promise. High on the back wall is Gene Austin. He was a singer, one of the music world's first crooners. He rose to international popularity in the 20s. His 1927 recording of My Blue Heaven sold over 5 million copies and was for a while the best-selling album of all time. Years later, he sung of a new Blue Heaven, the lyrics of which are featured right here on his crypt.
There's a new blue heaven in the sky.
He also co-wrote some of his hits, which would later become standards, like When My Sugar Walks Down the Street and The Lonesome Road. Gene's singing style would inspire the likes of Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. Gene had a small film career as well, in productions like Songs and Saddles. He died from lung cancer at age 71. The last terrace we'll visit today is the Iris Terrace. Here is a name familiar to you if you saw our Disney special, Elvia Allman. Her career as an actress began on the radio, performing in old-time radio comedies alongside the likes of Bob Hope, George Burns and Gracie Allen, and Abbott and Costello. Her voice work soon landed her jobs in cartoons, doing voices for Warner Brothers cartoons and also Disney. She was the original voice of Clarabelle Cow. She would begin to appear in front of the camera in the 40s, in films like A Night at Earl Carroll's. But by the 50s, she'd become best known for her work on television comedies, teaming up once again with many of her radio friends like George and Gracie and Abbott and Costello. She'd make regular appearances on shows like The Beverly Hillbillies, Blondie, and Petticoat Junction. And she had a particularly memorable appearance on I Love Lucy, as Lucy's boss in the Candy Factory episode.
All right, girls, now this is your last chance. If one piece of candy gets past you and into the packing room unwrapped, you're fired.
Yes, ma'am.
Let her roll!
Her final role was voicing Clarabelle Cow once again for 1990's The Prince and the Pauper. She died from pneumonia at age 87. Just a few spaces to the right along this same wall is the niche of Bob Cummings. He was an actor of stage, radio, film, and television. He began appearing in films in the 1930s, and by 1941 found himself a leading man alongside Jean Arthur in The Devil and Miss Jones, and in 1943 starred alongside Olivia de Havilland in Princess O'Rourke. You also saw him in two Hitchcock thrillers, Saboteur and Dial M for Murder, alongside Grace Kelly.
We strongly suspect that your husband had planned to murder you.
Tony arranged for Swan to come here that night and kill you.
How long have you known this?
On television, he won an Emmy for his role in the Studio One production of 12 Angry Men. And in 1955, he landed his own sitcom, The Bob Cummings Show, also known as Love That Bob, which ran for 5 seasons. He also starred in a sitcom called My Living Doll with Julie Newmar. Bob Cummings died from pneumonia and kidney failure at the age of 80. We're back out in the warm LA sun, just east of the Great Mausoleum in Rest Haven section. Here we find the grave of Bess Meredyth. She was one of early Hollywood's leading female screenwriters. She wrote for more than 150 films between 1910 and 1974. In the 20s and 30s, she was writing for just about every major studio. Her notable films include The Affairs of Cellini, Wonder of Women, and A Woman of Affairs. The latter two earned her Oscar nominations for Best Writing, making her among the very first women nominated for writing. Some of her later writing credits include The Mark of Zorro. Along with writing, Bess had been pretty busy as an actress in the silent era, She starred in her own serial, Bess the Detectress. Bess was a founding member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. She lived to be 79. Let's hop back in the car and make our way to Sunrise Slope section. Meet Charles Ogle. If you've ever wondered who the first actor to play Frankenstein's monster on film was, here is your answer. Charles Ogle was a silent film actor who, in 1910, played Frankenstein's monster in the very first film adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel. Charles appeared in an astounding 300-plus films between 1908 and 1926, one of the era's great character actors. Other notable roles include as Long John Silver in 1920's Treasure Island and as Mr. Cobb in Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. He died of arteriosclerosis at age 75. West of here is Inspiration Slope section. Here lies Ollie Woodson. He was a musician and singer, best remembered today as a member of the legendary R&B group The Temptations. He was lead singer of the group from 1984 to 1986, and again from 1988 to 1996, with hits like Treat Her Like a Lady. Ollie was instrumental in revitalizing The Temptations in this era. After The Temptations, he would perform as a solo artist as well. Ollie Woodson battled cancer later in life, passing away at the age of 58. Back in the car, and the camera fell off. Take 2 takes us to Graceland section on the right. Here lies Dwight Frye. The actor is remembered for insane villainous roles in numerous classic monster movies. He played Renfield, Dracula's servant, in 1931's Dracula.
Monster, we are here.
Fritz in Frankenstein. And Carl in Bride of Frankenstein.
What we need is a female victim of sudden death. Can you do it?
You promised me 1,000 crowns.
Other notable films include The Maltese Falcon and The Vampire Bat. Frye was just 44 when he died suddenly from a heart attack. Alice Cooper paid tribute to him with the song The Ballad of Dwight Frye. Continuing east, we arrive at one of the newer sections here, Resurrection Slope. Here rests Stephen "Twitch" Boss. He was a freestyle hip-hop dancer, choreographer, actor, and television personality. He danced his way onto the scene as runner-up on the 4th season of So You Think You Can Dance. He would return and perform in subsequent seasons of the show. He parlayed this success into roles in dance films, perhaps most notably as Jason in the Step Up films. Beginning in 2014, Twitch began working with Ellen DeGeneres on her show, first as a DJ, then eventually as an executive producer of the show. But on December 13th, 2022, Stephen "Twitch" Boss was found dead in an LA hotel room from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was just 40, leaving behind a wife and 3 kids. Let's circle around now north of the Freedom Mausoleum and Court of Freedom to the Dawn of Tomorrow and the Columbarium of Tenderness. Low on the wall is the niche of Bob Baker. He was one of the preeminent puppeteers in Los Angeles, particularly in the marionette style, the puppets on strings. Early in his career, he was hired by George Pal as head animator of Puppetoons, which made stop-motion puppet films. Bob became one of the men in town the studios came to when they needed puppets. He helped Disney with puppets at Disneyland and made contributions to numerous shows like Bewitched and Star Trek, and movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In 1963, Bob opened the Bob Baker Marionette Theater here in Los Angeles, which still operates today, delighting the young, and the young at heart, with charming marionette shows. I had a chance to see one of their recent Halloween shows. Highly recommend it. The Forest Lawn Museum here on the cemetery grounds even did an exhibit on Bob Baker last year, featuring some of his puppets. Bob passed away in 2014 at age 90. Doubling back, let's explore once again the Court of Freedom area. In the lot just in front of George Washington, we find the grave of Astrid Allwyn. The actress appeared in more than 50 films in the 30s and 40s. On the strength of her work on Broadway, she was given a movie contract at MGM. Notable roles include as Susan in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington alongside Jimmy Stewart, and Lois in Love Affair alongside Charles Boyer. After making Hit Parade of 1943, Astrid retired from performing to raise a family. She passed away from cancer at age 72. Let's make our way once again into the Freedom Mausoleum, which celebrates patriotism and American history. Left of the entrance, we arrive at the Columbarium of Victory. High on the wall to the right is the niche of Hank Worden. The character actor is known principally for rustic and western roles. He'd appear in more than 200 film and television productions from the 30s all the way into the 90s. Notable films include The Searchers, The Alamo, and Red River, all alongside John Wayne. He took his talents to television in the 50s, making appearances on shows like The Lone Ranger and Petticoat Junction. His final role was playing the waiter on Twin Peaks. Hank lived to be 91. Back out to the grounds, near the middle of this section, we find the grave of James Millican. He was another actor of Hollywood's Western heritage. James appeared in close to 200 films over his career, alongside some of the greats like Jimmy Stewart, William Holden, and Wild Bill Elliott. His films include Winchester 73, The Man from Colorado, and I Died 1,000 Times. He also made appearances on shows like Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok. James was just 45 when he died after a brief illness. Using the signing of the Declaration of Independence mosaic as a landmark, we turn right to find the Garden of Honor. In our first video here, we visited Sammy Davis Jr. in this garden. Today, let's meet some entertainers who helped launch his career. Meet Will Mastin. He was a vaudevillian, a dancer and singer in the early 20th century. He was the leader of the Will Mastin Trio, which also featured Sammy Davis Sr. and Howard Colbert. Sammy Davis Jr. would often join them to perform on stage as a little boy. But as he grew, so did his talents, and at the age of 16, Sammy Davis Jr. joined the trio officially, replacing Colbert. Will Mastin and Sammy Davis Sr. were good friends, and Sammy Davis Jr. saw Will as an uncle. The trio performed from the 20s to the 60s, including in the short film Sweet and Low and the 1956 Broadway musical Mr. Wonderful. Will Mastin died in 1979 at the age of 100. Sammy Davis Sr. is nearby. Daddy Sam was a talented singer and dancer in the Will Mastin Trio, who mentored the son who would become one of the 20th century's greatest entertainers. Sammy Davis Sr. also appeared in the film The Benny Goodman Story. He died in 1988 at the age of 87, just 2 years before his son died, who rests here next to him. In the western section of the Court of Freedom, we find a baseball legend named Casey Stengel. Over his 50-plus year career in baseball, he would become one of the sport's most beloved figures. He made his major league debut in 1912 for the Brooklyn Dodgers, playing outfield. Over the next 13 years, he'd play for numerous teams, including the Pirates, Phillies, Giants, and Braves. He was part of 2 World Series championship teams as a player. After retiring as a player, Casey began a career as a manager. He had moderate success managing the Dodgers in the 30s and the Braves in the 30s and 40s, but found his greatest success with the Yankees in the 40s to the 60s. His Yankees, featuring stars like Joe DiMaggio, Yogi Berra, and later a young Mickey Mantle, would become the dominant team in the league. They were the first team to win 5 consecutive World Series between 1949 and 1953. Stengel retired in 1965 and was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1966. He died from cancer at age 85. Around the corner is a replica of the Statue of the Republic in Chicago. Turning left, we head into the Columbarium of Heavenly Peace. Here is the niche of actor Johnny Mack Brown. His career began in the silent era, starring alongside the likes of Greta Garbo in The Divine Woman and Joan Crawford in Our Dancing Daughters. And early talkies include playing Mary Pickford's love interest in her first sound film, Coquette. In the 30s, Johnny began appearing in westerns. He struggled to gain traction until the 40s and 50s when he finally became one of cinema's most popular B-Western cowboy stars, particularly popular with young audiences. He would appear in around 170 films, mostly westerns, until retiring from the screen in the 1960s. Johnny died from heart failure at age 70. Into the Garden of Honor now, on the other side of the statue. Here is the grave of Lionel Stander. The gravel-voiced character actor is remembered for playing gruff and tough figures. Audiences today perhaps remember him best as Max on the television detective show Heart to Heart, and also the subsequent TV movies. His acting career began much earlier than that, in the 30s, appearing in films like Mr. Deeds Goes to Town and A Star is Born. He was blacklisted during the Red Scare in the 40s and took his talents to Europe, particularly Italy, where he made spaghetti westerns like Once Upon a Time in the West and appeared in The Adventures of Pinocchio. Back in the States, he'd appear in Spielberg's 1941 and Scorsese's New York, New York. He then landed the role on Heart to Heart, which earned him a Golden Globe. He died from lung cancer at the age of 86. Let's proceed northwest now to the Gardens of Memory. Heading into the Columbarium of Eternal Light, where we previously found Humphrey Bogart, we find his neighbor, Victor McLaglen. The English actor started out as a boxing champion before making movies during the silent era. By the 30s, he'd become one of John Ford's stock players, appearing in a dozen of his films. For his performance in 1935's The Informer, he won the Oscar for Best Actor. Years later, he'd be nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his role in The Quiet Man. Other notable films include Gunga Din and What Price Glory. Victor died from heart failure at the age of 72. Out in the garden area, let's pay a visit to Charlie Ruggles, an actor whose career spanned the teens all the way to the 70s, known particularly for comedic roles. He acted in several films throughout the silent era, but his first love at this time was the stage, with Broadway hits like Queen High. Come the 30s, he was more dedicated to film, becoming known for teaming up with Mary Boland in films like Mama Loves Papa, Six of a Kind, and Ruggles of Red Gap. Among his best-known roles are in Bringing Up Baby as the big game hunter and It Happened on Fifth Avenue. He had his own radio show, The Charlie Ruggles Show, in the 40s. Then come television, he'd have two of his own sitcoms, The Ruggles, which ran from 1949 to 1952, and The World of Mr. Sweeney, which ran for an astounding 345 episodes. Charlie also lent his voice to the Aesop sequences in Rocky and Bullwinkle. He died from cancer at age 84. In the next row, we find Charlie's brother, Wesley Ruggles. Wesley dabbled in acting between 1915 and 1918, including appearing alongside Charlie Chaplin, but would become best known as a director and producer. He began directing films in 1917 and in 1931 won acclaim for directing Cimarron. The film earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Director. He parlayed this success into directing several notable films in the 30s and 40s, like Bolero, I'm No Angel, True Confession, College Humor, and No Man of Her Own. Wesley died after suffering a stroke at age 82. Back in the car, we race the setting sun to reach the Weekirk Churchyard section. Just down the hill is the grave of Donald Crisp. His epitaph sums it up nicely. He was a director, actor, and motion picture pioneer. The actor appeared in more than 160 films and a handful of television productions. Like many of his neighbors here, his career started in the silent era, way back in 1908. Among his silent roles were as Ulysses S. Grant in D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. He also played Lillian Gish's father in Broken Blossoms. But his most memorable roles would come in the sound era, in films like Mutiny on the Bounty, Jezebel, Lassie Come Home, and How Green Was My Valley, a role which earned him the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor.
To sing before the Queen. My son, I never thought to see this beautiful day.
Donald Crisp would also direct more than 70 films, mainly during the silent era, including The Navigator with Buster Keaton, and Don Q, Son of Zorro with Douglas Fairbanks. He lived to be 91, passing away after a series of strokes. And finally, we continue down the hill to find Billy Benedict. You fans of the juvenile street toughs serials of the 30s, 40s, and 50s will remember Billy as Trouble in the Little Tough Guy movies, followed by the East Side Kids, then a regular role in the Bowery Boys films as Whitey.
Whitey, I thought I told you to turn that radio off. I did turn it off, Slip. It must be broke.
Billy worked prolifically, appearing in more than 300 film and television productions throughout his career. Other films include My Little Chickadee, Bride of the Monster, and The Sting. He also made appearances on just about every major TV show of the 50s to the 80s. Billy Benedict died after complications from heart surgery at the age of 82. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. At the end of our last video here, we shared with you how the marble replica of Michelangelo's David took a tumble back in 2020. All that remained standing were his feet, the rest of him covered in a shroud on the ground like the victim at a crime scene. This was the third marble David to tumble here. The first was felled by the Sylmar earthquake in 1971, the second by the Northridge earthquake in 1994. I suppose Forrest Long got sick of replacing the marble David, so when Dave IV was born in 2021, he was made of bronze. Let us hope he is a little more sure-footed than his predecessors.